I'm Barbara, 62 years old, a retired forensic accountant. Last Thanksgiving, I stood in my own dining room holding a glossy brochure for an assisted living facility in Florida. My sister-in-law, Valerie, slid it across the table to me right over the roasted turkey I had spent 6 hours preparing. Then, with that polished realtor smile of hers, she announced in front of 20 guests that it was time for me to downsize so she could list my Connecticut lakefront home. I turned to my husband, Richard, expecting him to shut it down, expecting him to defend me, defend our life. Instead, he calmly took a sip of his Cabernet and told the entire table it was a brilliant financial move. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply dabbed my mouth with a linen napkin and thought about the irrevocable trust they knew absolutely nothing about. But before I tell you exactly how I tore their little scheme apart piece by piece, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to remind entitled family members that your silence is not surrender, hit like and subscribe. I grew up believing family protects you. But after 35 years of marriage, I learned something much uglier. Sometimes family is just a group of people who think they have unrestricted access to your money. That Thanksgiving dinner started like every other holiday at our house. The silver had been polished. The crystal glasses caught the afternoon light reflecting off the lake. And my husband Richard sat at the head of the table, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch. He's a successful dentist, the kind of man who wears expensive cashmere sweaters and speaks in a low, soothing voice that makes people trust him instantly. For years I trusted that voice too. I had retired early from a demanding career investigating financial fraud, so I could raise our son and manage our properties. I thought I had earned peace. I thought I had earned a soft landing in life. I was wrong. Everything shifted right after I served the cranberry sauce. Valerie, who is married to Richard's younger brother, tapped her manicured nails against her wine glass to get everyone's attention. Valerie is 55, stunning, impeccably dressed, always wrapped in sharp designer suits and the scent of expensive perfume. She's one of the top real estate agents in our county, a career she only built after I personally paid off her real estate school debt 10 years ago. But gratitude doesn't last long in greedy families. She reached into her oversized leather tote bag and pulled out a stack of glossy folders. Not for everyone at the table, just for me. She slid them right down the center, stopping beside my plate. "Barbara, sweetie, I've been thinking about you so much lately," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You look so exhausted carrying those serving dishes today. This big house, all these stairs. It's just becoming too much for a woman your age. I found the most beautiful luxury retirement community in Boca Raton. No stairs, low maintenance, and they even have medical staff on call." The room went dead silent. 20 guests, extended family, a few neighbors. I watched my neighbor Susan freeze with her fork halfway to her mouth. Then I looked down at the brochure. A smiling group of elderly people playing pickleball stared back at me. I was 62. I ran 5 miles a day. I was in perfect health. This wasn't about my age. It wasn't about my knees. It was about my house, my land, my equity. Before I could even respond to the sheer audacity of it, my daughter-in-law Chloe jumped in. Chloe is 32, an aspiring social media influencer who walks into every room like it's a movie set and she's the star. "Aunt Valerie is so right," Chloe said, turning her performance toward the rest of the table. "Derek and I worry about you all the time, Mom. And honestly, the real estate market is so hot right now. If you sell the lake house, you could unlock all that equity. Derek really needs capital for his tech startup. We're drowning in server costs, and we need better cars to project the right image to investors." Then I looked at my son. Derek is 34, a man who has launched 3 separate companies and failed at every one of them because he loves the title of CEO far more than actual work. He wouldn't even look at me. He kept staring at his mashed potatoes like they held the answer to his shame. "Yeah, Mom," he muttered. "It just makes sense. We're a family. We need to optimize our assets. You and Dad don't need 4 bedrooms anymore. Honestly, it's kind of selfish to hold on to that much space when the next generation is struggling." Selfish. That word just hung there in the air. I had paid his out-of-state college tuition in cash. I had funded his first 2 failed businesses. I had bought Chloe's designer wedding dress. And now I was selfish, for living in the home I bought and paid for. I looked back at Valerie. She was practically glowing with excitement. I can list the property by Monday. Barbara, she said, already pulling a silver pen from her pocket. I'll even cut my commission by 1% because we're family. New York buyers are circling the zip code like sharks. We can have you packed and moved to Florida by Christmas. My heart pounded once, heavy, slow, controlled. I could feel the full weight of their greed pressing down on me, but I still had one final hope. I turned and looked at Richard. We had built this life together. He knew how much I loved that house, the garden, the lake view, the walls that had held our family memories for decades. I waited for him to stop this madness. I waited for him to tell Valerie to put her brochures away. I waited for him to respect his wife in her own home. Instead, Richard dabbed his mouth, folded his napkin, and looked at me with eyes so cold they barely seemed human. Valerie makes a very compelling argument, Barbara, he said. The property taxes here are ridiculous. Derek and Chloe need the financial support, and frankly, I'm tired of the upkeep. I think Florida is exactly what you need. We can discuss the sale tomorrow. What you need, not what we need. That one word told me everything, and my forensic accountant brain caught it instantly. He wasn't planning to come with me. He was planning to sell the biggest asset connected to my life and send me away. So I looked around the table. Valerie was calculating her commission. Chloe was calculating her new Tesla. Derek was calculating his startup bailout. And Richard? Richard was calculating his exit strategy. There they all sat, eating the food I had cooked, drinking the wine I had bought, dividing up my life as if I were already dead. The neighbors kept their eyes on their plates, too uncomfortable to interfere. The silence in that room was thick, suffocating. They expected me to explode. They expected me to cry, to shout, to become emotional so they could use my reaction against me. That's how people like them play the game. They provoke the matriarch until she breaks, and the moment she does, they use her pain as proof that she can no longer be trusted with power. So I picked up the brochure, ran my thumb slowly along its glossy edge, and let the room hold its breath. Then I looked Valerie straight in the eyes, then Derek, then Richard, and I smiled, a slow, calm, terrifying smile. "Thank you for your concern, Valerie," I said, my voice perfectly steady, not a single crack betraying the fury burning underneath my skin. "The weather in Boca Raton is lovely this time of year. Please pass the gravy." Richard smirked, convinced I had surrendered. Valerie beamed, certain she had just secured the biggest listing of her quarter. And just like that, they relaxed. They went back to dinner, back to talking about interest rates, moving companies, market timing. They thought they had won. They thought my silence was surrender. They thought I was just another older woman they could corner shame and push aside. What they didn't understand was this forensic accountant does not argue with thieves at the dinner table. She watches, she documents, she gathers evidence, she builds a flawless case. And when the time is right, she destroys them completely. My house was a fortress, and that night they handed me the keys to their own downfall. The moment Valerie reached for the gravy boat, my husband Richard behaved as if a business deal had just been finalized. He uncorked the reserve Cabernet we had been saving for a truly special occasion and poured himself a generous glass. He didn't even glance in my direction. He certainly didn't offer to refill mine. Instead, he leaned back in his custom-upholstered dining chair, swirled the dark red wine in his glass, and smiled at his brother and Valerie, like a man celebrating a victory. "You know," Val, Richard said smoothly, "I was reviewing the property tax assessment just last week. The value of this lakefront lot has skyrocketed. It makes no financial sense to keep that much capital trapped in a depreciating physical structure when the market is peaking." I just sat there staring at him. This was the man I had slept beside for more than 30 years, and now he was reducing our family home to nothing more than a depreciating physical structure. He said it with the same cold clinical detachment he used when telling a patient a tooth had to be pulled. Derek, suddenly emboldened by his father's tone, jumped right back into the conversation. The hesitant son disappeared. In his place was the fake tech entrepreneur he loved pretending to be online. "Exactly, Dad," Derek said, pointing his fork in Richard's direction. It's basic economics. My startup is at a critical stage right now. We've got a massive user acquisition strategy ready to launch, but our burn rate is too high. Angel investors want to see skin in the game. If Mom liquidates this house, we can funnel that equity straight into the seed round. It's an investment, Mom. You're not losing a house. You're becoming the primary stakeholder in a tech empire. I looked at my 34-year-old son in complete silence. This was the same boy who used to bring his laundry home every Sunday until he was 28, and now he was demanding my primary residence to fund a business that didn't even have a functioning app. Then Chloe clapped her hands together, sharp and theatrical, the sound so sudden it made our neighbor across the table flinch. "Derek is working so hard, Mom," Chloe said, her voice lifted into that fake, sugary enthusiasm she used whenever she wanted something expensive. "He barely sleeps. And honestly, it's embarrassing when we meet venture capitalists and pull up in our old BMW. It sends the wrong message. We really need to upgrade to a Tesla Model X. It shows that we're forward-thinking and eco-conscious. And our luxury apartment in the city is getting way too cramped for hosting networking events. It's just time for everyone to make a few sacrifices for the greater good of the family." Sacrifices for the greater good. That was the phrase she chose. I looked at Chloe's wrist. She was wearing the Cartier love bracelet Derek had bought her the previous Christmas. Then I looked down at Derek's shoes, limited edition sneakers that cost more than my first car. They were asking me to surrender the home where I had spent 20 years planting hydrangeas, repainting baseboards, and building a life, so they could buy an electric car to impress strangers. Valerie, sensing the momentum had fully shifted in her favor, pulled out her phone and placed it right beside the turkey platter. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen. "I already ran the comps in this zip code, Barbara," she said, her eyes gleaming with the predatory excitement of a woman mentally calculating a 6% commission on a $2 million listing. "If we list by Monday, we can trigger a bidding war. But we need to move fast. This place has to be completely decluttered. Those antique bookshelves in the study have to go. They make the room look dated. We need a clean slate. Neutral tones. Buyers need to picture their lives here. Not yours. Not yours." Those two words seemed to settle over the dining table like smoke. I was still sitting in the chair I had bought, still eating off the plates I had washed, still inside the home I had cared for. But in their minds, I was already gone, already erased. Already a ghost. To them, I was nothing more than the final obstacle standing between them and a very large pile of cash. Richard took another slow sip of wine and looked at me with that patronizing little smile I had once mistaken for kindness. "Don't worry about a thing, Barbara," he said smoothly. "You'll have my receptionist call a few moving companies on Monday morning. We'll get professionals to pack your things. You won't have to lift a finger. You've worked hard enough all your life. It's time for you to rest and let us handle the heavy lifting." That was the moment my forensic accountant brain fully came online. It started processing every word, every glance, every contradiction at lightning speed. Richard was a highly successful dentist with a booming practice. So why was he suddenly desperate to sell my house to rescue our son's failing company? Why did he say your things instead of our things, if this was truly about helping Derek? Why wasn't Richard dipping into his own investment portfolio? Why not use his business accounts? Why not touch any of the assets that were actually under his control? The numbers didn't make sense. The behavior didn't match the story. And when the math is wrong, someone is hiding something. This was not a father making a sacrifice for his son. This was a man trying to liquidate my assets before I discovered what he had buried. He thought that because I had spent the last 20 years baking pies, hosting book clubs, and decorating for holidays, I had forgotten how to follow the money. He thought I was just a tired old woman he could quietly push into a retirement community. He was catastrophically wrong. I smiled warmly at the table. If they wanted a performance, I could give them one. Slowly, I rose from my chair and smoothed the front of my linen dress. "I'll go get the pecan pie," I announced, my voice calm, polished, perfectly controlled. Not a single person suspected anything. Richard had already gone back to discussing golf handicaps with our neighbor. Valerie was tapping excitedly on her phone, no doubt already drafting the real estate listing for the house I was still standing in. I walked out of the dining room, and the heavy oak doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the sound of their smug little celebration. As I moved down the long hallway toward the kitchen, the air seemed to grow cooler. Then I stopped. Just outside the swinging kitchen door, I heard hushed, urgent voices. Derek and Chloe. They must have slipped out through the patio doors and circled around while I was coming down the hall. I pressed my back against the cool plaster wall and listened. I didn't peek through the glass. I didn't need to. Their words painted the whole ugly picture for me. "Are you sure your dad is really going to push this through?" Chloe whispered, her voice stripped of that fake, sugary sweetness she had used at the dinner table. Now it sounded sharp, thin, panicked. Because if American Express runs my platinum card one more time and it declines at the country club, I am literally going to die, Derek. We are $35,000 in the hole on that card alone. We cannot keep pretending we have money. Relax, babe, Derek hissed back. Didn't you see him in there? Dad is completely on board. He wants her out of this house just as much as we want the equity. Once Valerie lists the property, we can demand an early advance on our inheritance. Mom will sign whatever Dad puts in front of her. She hasn't looked at a financial document since the 90s. She just bakes and gardens. I held my breath. The arrogance of my own son was almost breathtaking. He thought I was financially illiterate just because I had let his father pay the restaurant bills for the last 20 years. But what about the startup? Chloe pressed. You told them the money was for the seed round. If they ask for business accounts or investor term sheets, what are we supposed to show them? You haven't written a single line of code in 6 months, Derek. The developers quit weeks ago. Derek let out a low laugh. A laugh that sounded so much like Richard's it made my stomach turn. The same smug, self-satisfied laugh Richard used whenever he was closing a deal he knew was crooked. Come on, Chloe, Derek said. The startup is just the narrative. It's the perfect excuse because Mom has a blind spot when it comes to my career. Once the cash hits our joint account, we pay off your credit cards, settle my high-interest personal loan, and head straight to the dealership for that Tesla Model X. We'll tell them the rest of the money is tied up in a long-term venture capital escrow account. By the time they figure it out, we'll be miles away, and Dad will already have moved her into some condo in Florida. I closed my eyes. And in that instant, the final pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a sickening click. There was no angel investor. There was no user acquisition strategy. There was no tech empire waiting to be built. My 34-year-old son and his 32-year-old wife were planning to drain my life savings to finance their luxury lifestyle and clean up the wreckage of their reckless debt. They were using a fake business emergency to manipulate the one thing they thought still made me weak, my maternal instinct. But the most chilling part wasn't Derek. It wasn't Chloe. It was what Derek had just revealed about Richard. Dad wants her out of this house just as much as we want the equity. Why? Why would Richard want me out of our fully paid-off home? Why would a wealthy dentist suddenly need to liquidate his wife's primary residence? My forensic accountant brain kicked into gear, instantly running through the patterns, the red flags, the motives. And I knew this much: when people become desperate to liquidate assets quickly, it usually means one of two things: hidden debt or a hidden second life. I opened my eyes. The sadness was gone, completely gone. All that remained was cold, hard clarity. I was no longer a mother overhearing her son's betrayal. I was an investigator standing at the edge of a massive fraud case, and the perpetrators were sitting in my dining room eating my turkey. I pushed the swinging door open. Derek and Chloe jumped apart like guilty teenagers caught stealing liquor. I walked straight to the counter, lifted the pecan pie, and picked up the silver cake server. Then I turned to them with a serene, gentle smile. "The pie is ready," I said smoothly. "You two should come back to the table. We wouldn't want you to miss any important family financial discussions." Chloe swallowed hard. For one brief second, real fear flashed across her face before she quickly pasted that polished influencer smile back on. Derek cleared his throat and hurried past me without meeting my eyes. I followed them into the dining room. Then I placed the pie directly in front of Richard. My gaze drifted to the glossy Boca Raton brochure still sitting beside my plate. And in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. The war had officially begun, and they had absolutely no idea who they were fighting. The morning after Thanksgiving is always chaos. I was standing in the checkout line at Whole Foods, pushing a cart filled with organic produce, imported cheeses, and the expensive dark roast coffee Richard insisted on every single morning. It was my usual Friday routine. The store was packed with people stocking up for the long holiday weekend. The line behind me was 5 customers deep. A young mother with a crying toddler tapped her foot impatiently. A tall man in a tailored gray suit kept checking his watch and sighing loud enough for everyone to hear. I calmly placed my groceries on the black conveyor belt. The cashier, a college student named Tyler, smiled warmly and scanned everything with practiced speed. The total came to $247. I reached into my leather handbag and handed over the platinum joint credit card Richard and I had shared for more than 15 years. Tyler tapped the card against the terminal. A harsh, flat beep cut through the noise. The screen flashed red. Declined. Tyler looked up, his friendly smile faltering. He tried again, this time inserting the chip into the slot. Another sharp beep. Insufficient funds or account suspended, he murmured quietly, trying to spare me the embarrassment. A prickling heat crept up the back of my neck. "Please try it one more time," I said evenly. "It's a platinum joint account with a $50,000 limit. There must be some kind of network error." Tyler swiped the magnetic strip. The terminal buzzed angrily. The same red letters flashed again. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," he said, handing the card back to me. "The system says you need to contact your bank immediately." Behind me, the man in the gray suit let out a dramatic groan. The young mother shifted her toddler to her other hip and looked at me with that particular mixture of annoyance and pity society reserves for older women it assumes are confused, helpless, or no longer capable of managing their own lives. Humiliation was exactly what this was meant to be. But I did not panic. I did not fumble through my bag for cash I already knew I didn't have. I simply looked at Tyler and gave him a polite nod. "Please cancel the entire transaction," I said calmly. "I'll leave the groceries here. Have a wonderful holiday." Then I turned and walked out through the sliding glass doors into the crisp November air, leaving my full cart and my public humiliation behind at register number 4. I got into my car, locked the doors, and shut out the noise of the parking lot. The silence inside the vehicle felt heavy, suffocating. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. I typed in my password. The screen buffered for a moment, then a gray box appeared. Access denied. Account locked. I entered the password again, carefully making sure there were no mistakes. The same gray box appeared. My heart rate didn't change. My hands didn't shake. A lesser woman might have assumed it was a glitch, a hack, a random banking error. But a retired forensic accountant knows exactly what a deliberate financial freeze-out looks like. Richard had done this. He had called the bank first thing that morning, changed the security credentials, and suspended my access cards. He wasn't just inconveniencing me, he was cutting off my oxygen. I opened my contacts, pressed his name, and put the call on speaker. It rang 4 times before he answered. "Richard here," he said, briskly professional, and composed, sounding exactly the way he did when instructing his dental assistants. "Richard, my platinum card was just declined at Whole Foods," I said, keeping my tone perfectly normal. "And I can't access the online banking portal either. Did the bank flag something for fraud this morning?" There was a brief pause. I could hear soft classical music in the background. He was sitting comfortably in his private office at the clinic. "No, Barbara, there's no fraud," Richard replied smoothly. His voice never wavered. "I called the wealth management team first thing this morning. I suspended the secondary cards and changed the portal access. We're entering a major transition period. I'm restructuring our assets to prepare for the sale of the house and free up immediate capital Derek needs for his business. You do not need to be making large discretionary purchases right now." I stared through the windshield at a woman cheerfully loading grocery bags into the trunk of her SUV. "Restructuring our assets," I repeated slowly. "Without discussing it with your wife of 35 years, without warning me before I stood in a public checkout line looking like a fool, you're overreacting." "Barbara," Richard sighed. It was the deep, patronizing sigh of a man speaking to someone he considered irrational, childish, inconvenient. "This is exactly why I took control of the financial situation. He continued, "You become far too emotional and attached to things. You heard Valerie last night. The housing market is moving quickly. We need full liquidity to make this transition work. Your job right now is not to wander around Whole Foods buying overpriced coffee and organic cheese. Your job is to drive home, go up to the attic, and start packing your winter clothes into boxes. We need the house staged by next Wednesday." My hand tightened around the leather steering wheel. He was openly telling me to go home and pack up my own life. He was stripping away my financial autonomy piece by piece so that by the time he put those transfer papers in front of me, I would already be scared, isolated, and dependent enough to sign anything. He wanted me helpless. He wanted me humiliated. He wanted me begging for a grocery allowance. "Are you listening to me, Barbara?" he snapped, cutting through the silence. "Yes, Richard," I said softly. "I'm listening to every single word." "Good." His tone shifted instantly, smoothing back into that fake, benevolent warmth he used on wealthy patients. "Just go home and start sorting the closets. I'll bring takeout tonight so you don't have to cook." I ended the call. Then I sat in that parking lot and let the full weight of his betrayal settle into my bones. He thought he had severed my lifeline. He thought all my security was trapped inside the accounts he controlled. He had forgotten something critical. Before I ever married him, I spent 10 brutal years tracing hidden offshore accounts, shell companies, and corporate fraud for the federal government. You do not lock a forensic accountant out of a bank account. You just invite her to find out exactly where you've been hiding the rest of the money. I drove back from the grocery store with my mind operating in a state of absolute clarity. The panic Richard had hoped to trigger by declining my credit card was completely gone. In its place was something far more dangerous, the cold mechanical precision of a woman who had spent 10 years dismantling elaborate financial lies. I turned off the main road and guided my car down the long gravel driveway leading to the lake house. And the moment the property came into view, I slammed on the brakes. A large white van was parked directly in front of my garage. The side of it was stamped with a bold black decal, Apex Real Estate Media. I put the car in park and stepped out into the sharp November wind. I didn't rush. I walked slowly, deliberately up the stone pathway I had laid with my own hands 20 years earlier. And there, standing in the middle of my hydrangea garden, was my sister-in-law, Valerie. She was wearing a tailored magenta power suit and clutching a silver clipboard. Beside her, a young man in a polo shirt was struggling with a professional camera tripod and a drone controller. He was standing directly on top of my winter flower beds. Valerie pointed one manicured finger toward the large bay windows in my living room. "Yes, get a wide angle from this corner," she instructed, her voice carrying cleanly through the cold air. "The natural light here is incredible, but we'll need to digitally erase those awful heavy curtains in post. Buyers want modern open concept now. Those drapes just scream 1990. I stopped at the edge of the garden. Valerie turned and finally noticed me. The sharp, calculating look on her face disappeared instantly, replaced by that bright, artificial smile she used when handing house keys to rich clients. "Oh, Barbara, honey, you're back early," she called, waving, as if she were welcoming me to her own open house. "We're just taking advantage of the golden hour. The sky is absolutely perfect for the exterior drone shots. I wanted to get a head start so we can have the listing live on the MLS by Monday morning." I looked at the young man hovering a drone far too close to my roofline. Then I looked back at Valerie. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I simply walked up to the photographer and stood directly in front of his camera lens. "Pack up your equipment," I said quietly. My tone was flat, empty, completely without emotion. "Pack it up and get off my property, now." The young man lowered the controller, visibly confused. His eyes darted back and forth between me and the woman in the magenta suit who was apparently paying him. Valerie marched toward me, her heels sinking slightly into the soft earth of my garden. "Barbara, what are you doing?" she hissed, her fake smile vanishing on the spot. "You're ruining the schedule. Richard called me an hour ago and gave me the green light. He said you were out running errands and that I should bring the media team over to get the exterior shots done. We are doing you a massive favor here. The market is peaking, and Richard wants this property liquidated before the holidays." I turned fully to face her. She stood there, clutching her silver clipboard chin, lifted in defiance, genuinely believing that because my husband had authorized this, she had authority over my home. "Richard does not own this land, Valerie. I said, keeping my voice calm and conversational. He does not hold the deed to this house, and he certainly does not have the legal right to send a real estate agent onto my property without my explicit written consent. You are trespassing. Valerie let out a short, patronizing laugh. It was an ugly sound. Oh, please, Barbara. Stop being so dramatic, she scoffed, flicking her hand dismissively. We're family. Richard handles all the financial and real estate decisions. He always has. You're upset because the reality of downsizing is finally hitting you. It's perfectly normal to get emotional about moving into assisted living, but you cannot derail a multi-million-dollar transaction just because you feel sentimental about some old curtains in a garden. I looked at her magenta suit. I looked at the diamond studs flashing in her ears. Then I took one slow, deliberate breath and let the sheer arrogance of her entitlement settle over me. She had pushed exactly the wrong button. Sentimental, I repeated softly. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Let's talk about sentiment, Val. Let's talk about loyalty. I took one step closer. You stand here in your $1,000 suit judging my curtains, but my memory works just fine. Let's go back 10 years. Valerie shifted her weight. Her eyes narrowed. I didn't let her interrupt. 10 years ago, you sat at my kitchen counter inside this very house sobbing into a paper towel. I said, my voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. Your husband Richard's brother had cut off your credit cards because of your gambling debt. You were desperate to become a real estate agent so you could earn your own money, but you had already failed the state licensing exam twice. You owed $5,000 for the final prep courses and you couldn't afford them. Your husband refused to help you. He told you that you were a failure. Do you remember that, Valerie? Her jaw tightened. The smug confidence began draining from her face, replaced by a flush of panic and embarrassment. She shot a quick glance toward the photographer, who was now pretending to clean his camera lens so he wouldn't have to acknowledge what he was hearing. I don't see what ancient history has to do with today, Valerie muttered, her voice noticeably smaller now. It has everything to do with today, I said, stepping even closer. Because Richard didn't write that check to save you. Your husband didn't write that check. I did. I quietly pulled $5,000 from my personal savings so you could finish those classes, pass that exam, and keep your dignity. I never asked for the money back. I never told Richard. I laid the foundation for your entire career, Valerie. And now you're using the very license I paid for to stand in my garden and try to sell my house out from under me so you can collect a 3% commission. Valerie froze. The truth was an ugly mirror, and I was forcing her to stare directly into it. But people like Valerie don't feel shame. When you confront them with their own character, they don't apologize. They get crueler. She straightened her posture and brushed an imaginary speck of dust from her sleeve. I earned my success, Barbara, she said, her voice turning cold and brittle. I worked 70-hour weeks to become the top agent in this county. That money you gave me was a gift from a wealthy housewife who had nothing better to do. Business is business. Derek needs the money for his company, and Richard is restructuring his assets. You are becoming a liability to this family. If you don't cooperate, Richard is going to divorce you anyway, and you'll be left with absolutely nothing. I'm actually trying to help you secure a nice condo before he cuts you off completely. The photographer had clearly heard enough. He grabbed his tripod, rushed back to the van, threw the equipment inside, and slammed the doors. A second later, he was gone, leaving the two of us alone on the manicured lawn. The air between us crackled with hostility. Valerie had just said out loud what Richard had been planning all along. Divorce, financial erasure, a total wipeout. She thought she had just delivered the final blow. She thought I would fall apart right there on the grass. Instead, I smiled, a calm, chilling smile. The smile of a forensic accountant who has just been handed the last piece of evidence needed to close the trap. Thank you for confirming the timeline, Val, I said, my voice softer than before. I was wondering how much you knew about Richard's little restructuring project. Tell me, when you list a property, do you usually verify the chain of title first? Or do you just take the word of a dentist who thinks he's smarter than the IRS? Valerie frowned clearly, thrown by the sudden shift in tone. What are you talking about? She demanded. Richard is on the deed. It's marital property. I turned my back to her and started walking toward the front door. Get off my lawn, Valerie, I called over my shoulder without bothering to look back. And when you speak to Richard tonight, tell him this. He locked the wrong bank account this morning. He just declared war on the only person who knows exactly where all the bodies are buried." Then I walked inside and locked the heavy oak door behind me, leaving her standing alone in the cold. I went straight into my husband's home office. I didn't need his computer password anymore. What I needed were the physical files hidden in the basement. It was time to go to work. I walked away from the front door and headed straight down the hallway toward Richard's private home office. The house was silent now. Valerie and her photographer were gone, but the threat they had left behind still hung in the air like smoke. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors and stepped inside. The room smelled of expensive leather and the faint cedar cologne Richard wore every single day. Everything was immaculate, controlled. His oversized oak desk sat squarely in the center of the room facing the lake. A polished silver clock ticked softly on the shelf behind it. It was the office of a man who believed he controlled everything around him. I walked around the desk and lowered myself into his high-backed leather chair. Then I reached for the mouse. The large desktop monitor flickered to life, casting a cold glow across the dark wood. A login screen appeared. For 15 years, Richard and I had shared the master password to that computer. It held the household budget spreadsheets, the property tax files, the login portals for our joint investment accounts, everything. I placed my fingers on the keyboard and typed the familiar sequence from memory. Our wedding anniversary, followed by Derek's birth year. Then I pressed enter. The screen trembled for a second. A red banner flashed across the monitor. Incorrect password. I leaned back slowly and took one measured breath. People make mistakes. Fingers slip. Keys stick. So I leaned forward and typed it again more carefully this time, pressing each key with deliberate precision. I hit enter. The same red banner appeared. Incorrect password. Please try again. I did not try a third time. I did not start guessing his mother's maiden name or the name of his favorite golf course in a panic. I simply pulled my hands away from the keyboard and stared at the glowing white login box. In 35 years of marriage, I had never once been locked out of our household computer. A sudden password change on a shared domestic device is never random. In forensic accounting, it is a screaming red flag, the digital equivalent of someone changing the locks on the front door while you're out buying groceries. I slowly turned in the chair and looked at the row of filing cabinets against the back wall. Then I stood up. I crossed the room and pulled on the brass handle of the top drawer. Locked. The second drawer. Locked. Then I turned toward the small metal safe tucked neatly into the corner bookcase. Usually the digital keypad glowed with a soft green standby light. Now it was dark. Dead. He had changed the battery and reprogrammed the master code. The truth did not hit me as sorrow. It hit me as clarity. Cold, sharp, crystalline clarity. This was not some impulsive decision Richard made after Thanksgiving dinner. This was not a rash response to Derek suddenly needing money for a failing startup, changing passwords, freezing platinum credit cards, locking filing cabinets, calling real estate agents, all within 12 hours. That kind of operation takes planning, meticulous planning. Richard had been preparing this for months. My mind immediately began building the timeline, the hushed phone calls he had taken in the garage all summer, the sudden increase in those so-called dental conferences out of state, the way he had smoothly talked me out of attending our annual meeting with the wealth manager back in October, claiming it was just routine paperwork he could handle himself. All that time while I was picking out new patio furniture and planting hydrangeas, he had been quietly moving pieces across the board. This was bigger than the lake house, much bigger. Richard wasn't trying to sell the house just to help our son. The lake house was only the final piece of a much larger scheme. He was staging a full financial extraction, a clean sweep. He was preparing to file for divorce, and he intended to leave me with nothing. He wanted the house sold, the asset converted to cash, and that cash buried inside offshore accounts or layered through corporate entities before divorce papers ever touched my hands. I stood in front of the locked computer screen for one last second and let the full arrogance of his mistake settle over me. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought that because I had spent the last 20 years being a supportive wife and devoted mother, my mind had somehow softened. that I had become harmless, that I would panic, cry, beg, and eventually sign whatever document he placed in front of me just to keep the peace. He forgot who he married. Before I was his wife, I was the woman the federal government called when wealthy executives tried to bury millions inside shell companies. I spent 10 years hunting down arrogant men who thought they were smarter than the system. Richard had managed to lock the digital doors to his current operation, but he made one catastrophic mistake. He assumed all the evidence lived on that hard drive. He forgot about the archived tax returns, the paper ledgers, the old boxes I had stored in the basement 15 years ago. He locked the wrong door. I turned away from the computer, walked out of the office, and headed straight for the basement stairs. The hunt had officially begun. I came up from the basement, brushing a thin layer of dust from my hands. I had expected an empty house, but the moment I turned the corner into the living room, I stopped cold. They were waiting for me. Richard was seated in his large leather armchair, his hands folded neatly in his lap. Derek and Chloe were sitting close together on the love seat, and the large center sofa across from them had been left completely empty waiting for me. It looked less like a family conversation and more like a corporate ambush. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. No one was smiling. Chloe was holding her phone at an awkward angle, pretending to scroll, but I could see the faint red reflection on the glass coffee table. She was recording me. Of course she was. They wanted a reaction. They wanted a scene. "Barbara, please come sit down," Richard said, using the softest, most soothing voice he had. It was the exact tone he used when telling patients they needed an expensive root canal. "We're all very worried about you, and we need to have a serious family discussion." I didn't hesitate. I walked over, sat down perfectly straight on the center sofa, folded my hands in my lap, and looked directly at my son. Derek shifted uncomfortably under my gaze, but only for a second. Then his fake confidence snapped back into place. He leaned forward, picked up a thick manila envelope from the coffee table, and held it with both hands like it was some kind of sacred legal document. "Mom, we need to talk about what's happening to your mind," Derek began, his voice trembling with manufactured sadness. "Dad told us what happened at the grocery store this morning. The manager at Whole Foods actually called him. They said you had a complete episode at the register. They said you forgot your PIN, started arguing with the cashier, and wandered out of the store disoriented, leaving all the groceries behind." I stared at him. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Richard had deliberately frozen my credit card and locked me out of the accounts. Now he was using the crisis he created to paint me as a confused, unstable old woman. I turned my eyes to Richard. He looked back at me with an expression of deep, polished pity. Derek pulled a crisp white page from the envelope and slid it across the glass coffee table toward me. "Dad spoke to Dr. Evans this afternoon." He continued tapping the paper with one finger. "He explained your recent erratic behavior, the forgetfulness, the anger, the way you've been wandering around the garden confronting Aunt Valerie for no reason. Dr. Evans wrote up a preliminary medical evaluation based on the symptoms Dad described. He strongly suspects early-onset dementia, Mom. He says you're showing classic signs of severe cognitive decline." Chloe leaned forward and let out a soft, dramatic gasp. Then she reached over and patted my knee. "It's okay, Mom," she whispered, staring just a little too directly into her phone camera to make sure the performance was captured in perfect high definition. "We're not angry with you at all. We know it's the disease making you act like this. That's why you were so hostile today. You just didn't understand what was happening. We're your family, and we're going to take over from here so you don't have to stress your poor brain anymore." I lowered my eyes to the paper on the table. The letterhead belonged to Dr. Arthur Evans, a general practitioner, a man who golfed with Richard every Sunday morning at the country club. I didn't touch the page. I didn't need to. My eyes went straight to the bold line near the bottom, "Significant cognitive impairment, unfit to manage financial or legal affairs." It was almost elegant in its cruelty. If a woman in her 60s gets angry, she's unstable. If she fights back after being financially cut off, she's incompetent. If she resists, she must be sick. Richard understood exactly what he was doing. If he filed for divorce, I would demand half. But if he could prove I was mentally unfit, he could strip me of my rights entirely. He could petition for guardianship. He could seize control of my finances, sell the house, drain the accounts, and lock me away in that retirement facility in Florida without my consent. "You are not well, Barbara," Richard said, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "We cannot allow you to manage the house sale or any of our joint finances in this fragile state. You no longer have the legal capacity to make sound financial decisions. I've already contacted my attorneys. They're preparing the paperwork to give me full medical and financial authority over your affairs. We're doing this to protect you from yourself because we love you." Then they all went still, waiting, watching. They wanted the explosion. They wanted me to scream that I wasn't crazy. They wanted me to throw the paper in Derek's face. They wanted me to cry, wave my arms, and spiral just enough for Chloe to capture the perfect clip of an unhinged older woman resisting help. Because the harder I fought emotionally, the crazier I would look. I took one slow, deep breath, then another. I felt my heartbeat settle into a slow, steady rhythm. And in that moment, I called on every single year of my forensic accounting career. I looked at the forged medical document, then I lifted my eyes and looked directly at my husband. "That is a very serious diagnosis, Richard," I said. My voice was quiet, smooth, completely empty of emotion. My hands remained folded neatly in my lap. I didn't even pull away from Chloe. It is truly remarkable that Dr. Evans was able to perform a comprehensive neurological evaluation and diagnose early-onset dementia without ever seeing me in his office, ordering a single blood test, or administering one cognitive exam. He must be a true medical pioneer. Richard flinched, just slightly. But I saw it. The calmness in my voice had caught him completely off guard. He had expected a sobbing housewife. He had not expected cross-examination. Derek turned and looked at his father, his confidence suddenly flickering. Then slowly I stood. I smoothed the front of my clothes, and then I looked straight into Chloe's camera lens. "Make sure you back that video up to the cloud, Chloe," I said, offering her a polite, chilling smile. "It's going to be fascinating evidence when the state medical board investigates Dr. Evans for issuing fraudulent diagnostic documents to help his golfing buddy commit financial abuse against his wife." Then I turned and walked out of the living room, and behind me, I left them sitting there in stunned, airless silence. I hadn't even reached the archway of the living room when Richard shot to his feet. His large frame blocked my path to the hallway. He moved with a speed I hadn't seen in years, sudden, aggressive, almost violent. The mask of the concerned husband was slipping now, revealing the desperate, greedy man underneath. "Sit back down, Barbara," he ordered. His voice had lost every trace of its fake warmth. Now it was flat, hard, cold. "We are not finished here." I stopped, and for one long second, I looked at the man who had promised to love and protect me 35 years ago. Now he was standing between me and the door in the very house my own father had left me. So I turned around, slowly walked back to the sofa, and sat down exactly the way I had, before my hands resting quietly in my lap. I did not cross my arms. I did not glare. I simply waited. Richard reached into the thick manila envelope on the glass coffee table and pulled out a heavy stack of legal papers bound with a dark blue backing. Then he dropped it onto the table. It landed with a heavy, undeniable thud right beside the fake medical diagnosis. That Richard said, leaning over the table so he towered above me, is a general durable power of attorney. It gives me immediate full legal authority over your medical decisions, your real estate assets, and all of your individual financial accounts. It allows me to execute the sale of this lake house on your behalf so you don't have to stress your fragile mind with complicated closing paperwork. My attorneys drafted it specifically for this situation. I looked down at the document. A general durable power of attorney is one of the most dangerous papers a person can ever sign. It is not just paperwork. It is the legal equivalent of handing someone the keys to your entire existence. If I signed that document, Richard could drain my retirement accounts, sell my family home, and authorize some private facility to lock me in a dementia ward against my will. he would have unchecked power over every dollar I owned and every breath I took. Chloe knew this was the climax of their little intervention. She shifted on the love seat and raised her phone higher. That tiny red recording light glared at me like an evil eye. She needed me to look unstable on camera. She needed me to yell, to throw the pen, to do something emotional enough that they could later show a judge and say, "See, she's irrational. She's dangerous. She can't be trusted." But when I still didn't react, Chloe escalated. She let out a trembling sob, and I watched almost in disbelief as real tears spilled over her lashes and rolled down her perfectly contoured cheeks. It was an astonishing performance. "Please, Mom," Chloe cried, her voice cracking with carefully manufactured desperation. "Please, just sign it. We love you so much, and it hurts us to see you like this. You've been so confused lately, and it's tearing this family apart. Derek hasn't slept in weeks because he's so worried about you, and the startup is already failing because of all this stress. If you just sign the paper, Dad can handle everything. We can save Derek's company. We can get you the help you so desperately need. Please, don't destroy this family because of your pride." It was Oscar-worthy. To an outsider, she would have looked like a terrified, loving daughter-in-law, begging a stubborn, mentally declining older woman to accept help. They wouldn't see the Cartier bracelet on her wrist. They wouldn't see the cold calculation sitting right behind those tears. Derek jumped in the second she finished. Of course he did. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and stared at me with an expression of aggressive disappointment. "Are you really going to do this, Mom?" he asked, shaking his head. "Are you really going to let my entire life fall apart because you refuse to admit your brain is failing? I'm your only son. I need that equity to survive. Do you want me to go bankrupt? Do you want Chloe and me out on the street because you're too paranoid to let Dad manage the estate? Just pick up the pen and sign the damn paper." The pressure in that room was suffocating. It was a perfectly coordinated ambush coming from every direction. Richard brought the legal threat and the physical intimidation. Derek brought the guilt, weaponizing the fact that he was my only child. Chloe brought the tears, the emotional manipulation, and the camera. And hanging over all of it like a shadow was Valerie waiting for the second she could swoop in and sell my home to the highest bidder. They were trying to crush me under the weight of my own maternal instinct, my own wifely duty. Because women of my generation were trained for this, trained to sacrifice, trained to shrink, trained to fold ourselves into smaller and smaller pieces so our husbands and children could take up more room. They were counting on that conditioning. They believed that after 35 years of habit I would break, that I would cry, apologize for being difficult, beg them to stop yelling, and sign away my entire life just to buy a moment of peace. I lowered my gaze to the power of attorney. The thick white pages seemed to mock me. Then I saw it. At the bottom of the last visible page, a blue ink stamp. I recognized it instantly. A notary seal. It had already been stamped and signed by Gregory Vance. Gregory was Richard's golfing buddy, the same Gregory who owned the local car dealership. Richard had actually convinced his friend to pre-stamp and notarize a legal document before witnessing my signature. Blatant fraud, documented fraud, right there on my coffee table. The arrogance was almost breathtaking. He was committing a crime in front of me because he truly believed I was too old, too emotional, and too stupid to notice. Slowly, I reached out my hand. My fingertips brushed the thick, expensive paper. And in that moment, I thought about every year I had worked in my 20s and 30s. The late nights, the audits, the endless spreadsheets, the corrupt corporations I had helped dismantle, the money I had earned, saved, and invested long before I ever became Richard's wife. I had built a fortress of financial security with my own mind and my own labor, and I had graciously allowed them to live inside it. Now they were trying to change the locks and throw me into the cold. The pressure in the room was immense, but I didn't feel fear. I felt something far more dangerous. The cold, exact focus of a forensic accountant who has just been handed the murder weapon with the killer's fingerprints still fresh on the handle. And then I looked at the silver pen resting on the glass table. My eyes drifted to the heavy silver pen resting on the glass table. Across from me, the little red recording light on Chloe's phone still glared like a warning. They were waiting for the explosion. They wanted me to snap. They wanted me to hurl the pen across the room, burst into tears, or start screaming so Chloe could hand a judge the perfect piece of staged evidence. "Look at this unstable woman, Your Honor. She clearly needs her husband to take control of her life." So I took one slow, careful breath and did the exact opposite of what they expected. I gave them a soft, defeated smile. Then I let my shoulders sink forward just slightly, copying the posture of a tired, confused woman who had finally run out of strength. "You're right, Richard," I said, letting just the faintest tremor enter my voice. "It's all been so overwhelming lately. My memory isn't what it used to be. I'm just so tired. I want to rest." I saw the shift instantly. The tension drained from Richard's shoulders. A smug, victorious smile spread across Derek's face. And Chloe's stupid, greedy Chloe's actually lowered her phone a little, already convinced the win was hers. They thought they had broken me. Slowly I reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the silver pen. I held it above the signature line of the General Durable Power of Attorney. The pre-stamped notary seal stared up at me like a challenge. But just before the pen touched the page, I stopped. My throat feels so dry, I whispered, "I just need a sip of my drink before I sign." Right beside the legal papers sat a tall crystal glass filled to the brim with dark purple grape juice. I reached for it with my left hand, and I made sure my fingers fumbled clumsily against the smooth glass. Then, with one perfectly calculated flick of my wrist, I knocked it over. The glass tipped, and a dark wave of purple liquid came crashing across the coffee table. It rushed straight over the thick stack of legal papers. The white pages drank it up instantly, blooming into a violent, ruined shade of purple. The ink from the fraudulent notary stamp bled at once, smearing and running down the page like a confession dissolving in real time. In less than 2 seconds, the entire document was destroyed. "Oh my goodness," I gasped, pressing both hands to my mouth in fake horror. "Look what I've done. I'm so clumsy today. My hands are shaking so badly." Richard shot out of his leather chair so fast it nearly toppled backward. His face turned a deep, dangerous shade of red. "Jesus Christ, Barbara," he shouted, grabbing napkins and frantically blotting at the soaked pages. "That was an original notarized copy. It's completely destroyed." I rose slowly to my feet, one hand pressed lightly against my chest. "I'm so sorry, Richard," I whispered, turning my wide, frightened eyes toward Chloe's camera. "I'm just so exhausted and confused. My brain really is failing me, just like Dr. Evans said. I need to go lie down." "You can print a new copy and I'll sign it first thing Monday morning when my head is clear, I promise." I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked slowly out of the living room, leaving the three of them scrambling over a spreading puddle of purple juice and ruined fraud. And as I stepped into the hallway, only one thought echoed through my mind. I had just bought myself 48 hours, and 48 hours is more than enough time for a forensic accountant to burn an empire to the ground. Midnight. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 12, each chime echoing through a house gone completely silent. I lay in the guest bedroom, staring into the dark, listening to the steady rhythm of my husband's breathing through the thin wall that separated us. Richard was sleeping soundly. Of course he was. He was a man utterly at peace because he believed he had finally cornered a sick, helpless old woman. He thought the spilled grape juice was nothing more than a temporary inconvenience, a clumsy accident caused by a deteriorating mind. He thought he would simply print a fresh power of attorney on Monday morning, slide it across the table, and take everything I owned. He was sleeping the deep, comfortable sleep of the arrogant and the untouchable. Slowly, I pushed aside the heavy quilt and swung my legs out of bed. I didn't turn on the bedside lamp. I knew every floorboard in that house. I had polished them with my own hands for 20 years. I moved silently down the dark hallway, slipping past Richard's locked home office. He had changed the digital passwords. He had locked the filing cabinets upstairs. He believed he had built an impenetrable fortress around his financial secrets. But arrogance always breeds stupidity. Richard was a dentist, not a forensic accountant. He thought money only existed on glowing computer screens and behind online banking portals. He forgot about the one thing no fraudster ever fully escapes: the permanent, undeniable paper trail. He forgot about the basement. I opened the basement door and descended the wooden stairs into the cool, damp air below. The basement was a graveyard of our past old holiday decorations, broken patio chairs, heavy plastic storage bins, forgotten pieces of a life built over decades. In the far corner stood a row of ugly gray metal filing cabinets pressed against the concrete wall. They held 15 years of physical tax returns, business ledgers, and bank statements. Richard had never bothered locking them because he considered paper records obsolete. He thought the past was dead, buried, forgotten. I reached up and pulled the chain on the single bare bulb overhead. A harsh yellow light flooded the corner. I didn't feel tired. I didn't feel the ache in my 62-year-old joints. The moment my hand closed around the cold metal handle of the top drawer, I felt that familiar electric current moving through my veins. It was the same feeling I used to get when I walked into the corporate headquarters of a corrupt hedge fund carrying a federal subpoena. In that moment, I was no longer Barbara the grieving wife, no longer Barbara the confused mother. I was Barbara the forensic accountant, and I was about to dissect my husband's lifeline by line. I yanked open the heavy drawer labeled Tax Returns 2018 to Present. The smell of old paper and dust rushed into the air. I pulled out the thick manila folders containing our joint tax filings from the last 5 years and carried them to an old wooden folding table. Then I sat down in a metal chair beneath that merciless yellow bulb. I didn't have dual monitors. I didn't have specialized forensic software. I didn't have a team of junior analysts. All I had were my reading glasses, a yellow legal pad, and a cheap ballpoint pen. But a trained human mind hunting for a specific lie is far more dangerous than any algorithm. I opened the folder from 3 years earlier and started with the basics: W-2 forms, K-1 schedules from Richard's dental practice. I ran the gross revenue numbers in my head. The clinic was thriving, bringing in more than $2 million a year in gross receipts. But when I reached the net income section, the numbers dropped off a cliff. The profit margins had been shrinking steadily for 4 straight years. Richard had always told me the same story: rising dental supply costs, higher staff insurance premiums, routine business pressure. And because I trusted him, I believed him. But now, looking at the raw data through the eyes of an investigator, his lies practically glowed on the page. I flipped to the Schedule C forms detailing profit and loss. Office supplies looked normal. Payroll looked standard. Then my finger stopped. Professional consulting and marketing services. 3 years ago, $50,000. 2 years ago, $120,000. Last year, $250,000. A local dental clinic in Connecticut does not need $250,000 in outside marketing and consulting. I picked up my pen and began writing on the legal pad. Then I pulled out the corresponding business bank statements tucked into the back of the folder. For the next 2 hours, I cross-referenced dates, wire amounts, invoice totals, and payment patterns. And then I found it: a large recurring monthly wire transfer leaving the clinic account. Same amount range, same timing, same destination every single time. ES Consulting, LLC. The moment I saw the name, I knew exactly what it was. Not a consulting firm, not a marketing agency, a shell company. I studied the routing information and the registration address listed on a copied invoice: Wilmington, Delaware. Of course, Delaware is the beating heart of corporate secrecy in America. Anyone can form an LLC there without publicly revealing the true owner. Men who want to hide money from their wives, their partners, or the government love Delaware for exactly that reason. Richard had been bleeding his own dental practice dry on purpose. He was disguising clinic revenue as fake business expenses, lowering his tax burden, and funneling the cash into a Delaware shell company he thought I would never trace. He was draining our marital assets in plain sight, starving the joint accounts, creating the illusion that money was suddenly tight, giving Derek and Chloe the perfect excuse to pressure me into selling the lake house. It wasn't financial stress, it was financial abuse. And it was sophisticated. But sophisticated criminals still make mistakes. Even smart men get sloppy when they believe no one is watching. Richard was arrogant enough to assume I would never dig through the physical invoices. So I kept going. I pulled more folders from the cabinet, messy stacks of raw receipts, unopened business mail, random vendor correspondence his receptionist had clearly shoved into storage at the end of each year. I sorted through hundreds of pages. Dental supply catalogs, utility bills, holiday cards from vendors, junk mail, and I kept looking for the mistake because I knew it had to be there. And then at the very bottom of the pile, half hidden beneath a stack of old magazines, I found it. A lease agreement. Not for office space, not for a dental clinic. A luxury residential lease in a high-rise apartment building in downtown Boston. I unfolded the crisp paper carefully. The rent was $8,000 a month. $8,000. The guarantor listed on the lease, the party legally responsible for payment, was ES, Consulting LLC. But the primary tenant on page 2 was not a business. It was a person. Elena Santos. Date of birth, 1998. I sat frozen in that cold basement staring at the name in black ink. Elena Santos was 28 years old, 6 years younger than my own son, and in that instant, every final piece of the puzzle slammed into place with brutal, sickening clarity. ES Consulting. Elena Santos. Richard wasn't restructuring assets to save Derek's pathetic startup. He wasn't trying to protect me from cognitive decline. He was trying to liquidate my $2 million lake house because his 28-year-old mistress had expensive taste and his dental practice could no longer support both of his lives. He needed a flood of untraceable cash. He needed my equity. He wanted me locked away in a Florida retirement facility under a fraudulent dementia diagnosis while he built a fresh new life in Boston with a woman young enough to be his daughter. And he wanted to walk away clean. I looked down at my hands resting on the table. They were perfectly steady. I didn't feel the devastation of a betrayed wife. I didn't feel the urge to run upstairs, scream in his face, or throw his tailored suits onto the front lawn. Crying is biological. Revenge is mathematical. Richard had committed tax fraud by disguising his mistress's apartment and lifestyle as deductible business expenses. He had defrauded the federal government. He had financially abused a senior woman. He had coerced a doctor into fabricating a diagnosis. He had attempted to use a fraudulently notarized power of attorney. He had handed me the blueprint to his own destruction. Carefully, I gathered the tax returns, the bank statements, and the lease agreement. I stacked them neatly, aligning every edge. Then I slid them into a thick brown envelope. It was no longer just a folder of old records. It was a loaded weapon. I turned off the harsh basement light and climbed the wooden stairs back into the dark, silent house. I passed Richard's office without even glancing at the locked door. Then I returned to the guest bedroom, slipped the brown envelope beneath my mattress, and lay back down in the dark. Through the wall, I could still hear my husband's calm, steady breathing. He had 48 hours left to enjoy his beautiful, arrogant little dream. On Monday morning, I was going to burn his entire world to the ground. And the best part was, he was going to hand me the match himself. The morning sun poured through the kitchen windows just as my phone began to ring. I was sitting at the granite island slowly sipping black coffee in a house that had finally gone quiet. Richard had left early for a Saturday morning golf game with Dr. Evans. I had no doubt the two of them were spending 18 holes discussing their little medical forgery. I glanced at the caller ID flashing on the screen. Valerie. Of course. I took one more unhurried sip of coffee, set the mug down carefully, and answered the call. Then I placed her on speaker so her voice would carry clearly through the empty kitchen. "Good morning, Barbara," Valerie chirped. Her voice was bright, loud, aggressively cheerful, the kind of fake warmth used by a woman who expects immediate obedience. "I hope you're feeling better today after all that confusion yesterday. Richard told me you had a little accident with some grape juice and ruined the legal paperwork. Such a shame. But don't worry, he's getting a fresh copy printed on Monday. In the meantime, we really need to stay on schedule. I have an open house planned for next weekend, and I need to know whether you've started packing the guest bedrooms." I leaned back in my chair and said nothing. I let the silence stretch across the phone line. People like Valerie hate silence. Silence makes them feel control slipping out of their hands. "Barbara, are you there?" she asked, her voice tightening as the sugary sweetness began to crack. "I'm here, Valerie. I replied, my tone smooth and completely flat. And no, I haven't started packing anything. A sharp sigh hissed through the speaker. Barbara, we do not have time for you to throw yourself a pity party, Valerie snapped. Just like that, the mask was gone. Richard is finalizing the power of attorney on Monday morning. As soon as he signs that paper on your behalf, I'm listing the house on the private market. I already have 2 buyers lined up from New York looking for a lakefront property exactly like this one. They're prepared to make all cash offers above asking. I am not going to let you sabotage a multi-million-dollar deal just because you're feeling sentimental or confused. I traced the rim of my coffee mug with one finger. You seem very confident Richard will have the legal authority to sell this house, I said quietly. He will have the authority, Valerie shot back, her voice dripping with arrogance, because you're going to sign that document. And if you refuse because of your deteriorating mental state, Richard will take that medical evaluation straight to a judge and get an emergency conservatorship. Either way, you are leaving that house, Barbara. You can do this the easy way and let me hire movers to pack your things for the Florida condo. Or you can do it the hard way. I let that sit for a beat. And what exactly is the hard way, Valerie? I asked. Her answer came without hesitation. The hard way is me bringing my brokerage attorneys into this, she said, her voice now cold and razor sharp. If you try to lock us out or interfere with the staging process, it'll have our legal team draft a formal notice to vacate. We will treat you like a hostile squatter in your own home. Do not test me, Barbara. I have a 3% commission on a $2 million sale riding on this. I'm not about to let some stubborn, sick old woman stand between me and my paycheck. Derek needs this money. Richard needs this money. You are the only thing standing in the way of this family surviving. Then she laughed. A cruel, brittle little laugh. Look at you, Barbara, she continued. You've spent your whole life hiding in that house, baking pies and letting Richard handle the real world. You don't understand how business works anymore. You don't understand how fast money moves. I built my agency from the ground up. I know how to close a deal. You are a liability to this transaction. Your own son told me last night he can barely look at you without feeling sorry for you. You are dragging everyone down. And I listened. I listened as she laid out the entire conspiracy in her own words. She openly admitted her role in the hostile takeover of my assets. She threatened me with fraudulent legal action. She invoked my fabricated medical incompetence as leverage. She made it perfectly clear that she knew exactly what Richard was planning and intended to profit from it. She thought she was untouchable because she had Richard and Derek standing behind her. She thought she was the smartest woman in the room. You're very brave over the phone, Valerie, I said softly. It's fascinating how quickly you forget who paid for the real estate license you're now threatening to use against me. That money was 10 years ago, Barbara, she sneered. Get over it. You're living in the past, and your brain is obviously slipping. The reality is this: by next Friday, the house will be under contract and you'll be on a one-way flight to Boca Raton. Start packing, Barbara, and if I come over there on Tuesday and those ugly antique bookshelves are still sitting in the study, I'll personally throw them into a dumpster. Then she hung up. The dead dial tone echoed through the kitchen. I reached over and calmly ended the call. And to my own surprise, I didn't feel threatened. I didn't feel panicked. I didn't feel the crushing fear she had tried so hard to force into me. What I felt was peace. Deep, profound peace. Because Valerie had just handed me everything I needed. She had confirmed her direct involvement in the fraudulent sale of the property. She had admitted she was coordinating with Richard around the forged power of attorney. She had threatened legal action based on coercion and a fabricated medical narrative. And in Connecticut, knowingly participating in the fraudulent sale of a property involving financial duress or medical coercion is the kind of conduct that can destroy a real estate career in a single blow. Valerie thought she was holding a gun to my head. She didn't realize she had just handed me a confession. I picked up my coffee mug and took another slow sip. It was going to be a beautiful weekend. I ended the call with Valerie and set my coffee mug down on the cold marble countertop. The kitchen had gone so still I could hear the clock ticking off each passing second. They thought I was sitting there trembling. They thought a 62-year-old woman backed into a corner would automatically surrender. They believed that 35 years of being an obedient wife had worn away every ounce of my sharpness. But what they didn't understand was this. When you back a forensic accountant into a corner, you don't just push her past her breaking point, you give her the perfect reason to destroy you completely. I rose from my chair and walked straight up the second-floor hallway. I entered the master bedroom and crossed to the old oak wardrobe tucked quietly into the corner. Richard had never touched that piece of furniture. He preferred sleek, expensive, modern pieces and had always looked down on the antiques my father left behind. That was his fatal mistake. My father had been a careful man, a deeply intelligent man, and he taught me something when I was still very young. Love can fade. People can betray you, but legal documents endure. I knelt on the hardwood floor and pulled open the bottom drawer of the wardrobe. Beneath thick layers of folded wool blankets, I slid my hand into a narrow, hidden compartment built into the back panel and pulled out a slim metal box. Slowly, I lifted the lid. There was no cash inside, no jewelry, no diamonds, only a weathered set of parchment-colored documents aged softly by time, and at the very top of the file was a strong, unmistakable signature. My father's, legally notarized more than 20 years ago. This was the document Richard had never known existed. When my father died, he had not left this house to me directly the way Richard and everyone else had always assumed. He had quietly created an irrevocable trust and transferred the entire property into it. I was the sole beneficiary and the sole lifetime trustee. Under Connecticut law, this house had never been marital property, not for one single day. Richard did not possess one shred of legal authority over a single brick of this home. His fake medical evaluation, his fraudulent power of attorney. All of it was worthless in the face of this document. I held the file in my hands, feeling the full weight of the truth. Then I reached for my phone. I dialed a number I had known by heart for many years. The line rang twice before a warm professional voice answered. Law offices of Marcus. This is Marcus speaking. Marcus, my father's attorney. The man who had helped build the legal fortress Richard was now too arrogant to realize he had been attacking. Marcus, it's Barbara, I said. My voice was calm, cold, smooth as the frozen lake beyond my windows. There was a brief pause, then his tone shifted immediately, becoming more personal, more attentive. Barbara. It's been a long time, he said. Are you all right? I'm doing wonderfully, Marcus, I replied, and for the first time that weekend I truly meant it. But I need you to go to work right now. Pull my father's irrevocable trust file from your secure vault. We're activating the full asset protection clause. My husband is trying to force me to sell this house and funnel the proceeds through a Delaware shell company. He also intends to use fraudulent medical documents to strip me of my legal autonomy. Silence, just for a second. And when Marcus spoke again, the warmth was gone. In its place was the sharp, lethal precision of a trial attorney already preparing for war. I understand, he said. I'll draft immediate restraining measures. Anyone attempting to transact on that property will be exposing themselves to real estate fraud. Do you need anything else from me? I turned toward the window and looked out at the hydrangeas standing tall in the morning sunlight as if they too had been waiting for this moment. And then I smiled. Yes, Marcus, I said slowly, clearly every word deliberate. My husband isn't just defrauding me. He's defrauding the federal government. I'm holding documented evidence of tax evasion and money laundering tied to a shell company he used to fund a much younger mistress. I want you to connect me with the IRS whistleblower office. I intend to file under the whistleblower program and claim 30% of every penalty they recover. Another pause. He knew exactly what that meant. Richard hadn't just betrayed his wife. He had made himself a target the federal government would love. It's time, I said softly, to take back what's mine and let all of them pay for their greed. Then I ended the call, and just like that, the perfect legal trap was in place. Their cruel little feast had officially begun its countdown to destruction. At exactly 6 o'clock on Monday evening, the sound of cheerful laughter drifted up from the first floor and echoed through the oak staircase. I stood in the shadows of the upstairs hallway, looking down into my own living room. They hadn't wasted a single second. Richard stood beside the fireplace with a glass of expensive red wine in his hand, smiling broadly at a young couple I had never seen before. Valerie, dressed in a sharp emerald suit, floated around the room, pointing at the architectural details of the ceiling, as if she had personally designed them herself. Derek and Chloe were stretched across the velvet sofa. Chloe held her phone up, filming the room with the smug smile of someone who thought she had just won the lottery. They were throwing a celebration party on the very property they believed was already theirs. And the strange young couple, they were the buyers from New York. The wealthy prize Valerie had promised everyone. The room was saturated with the scent of expensive candles and unbearable arrogance. "This house truly has incredible energy," Valerie said brightly, her voice lilting with fake warmth. "The open layout gives you full access to all this natural light. And of course, the lake behind the property offers complete privacy. The current owner is preparing to relocate to a luxury retirement community in Florida, so everything will move very quickly. Her husband, Dr. Richard, has already completed all the necessary legal authorization. You won't have to worry about any complications from the seller." Richard nodded with smug satisfaction. He took a sip of wine and moved toward the glass coffee table in the center of the room. "That's exactly right," he said in that deep, persuasive voice that had fooled people for decades. "My wife's health has been declining recently. The confusion that comes with age is starting to appear, so I've stepped in to handle everything and let her rest. We want this transition to be as smooth as possible. My attorney has already prepared the deposit agreement. It's sitting right here on the table. All you need to do is wire the deposit into escrow, and we can close the deal by next week. Everything is transparent and completely legal." The young couple nodded sympathetically. The wife looked around the room with open admiration. "I'm so sorry about your wife's condition," she said softly. "But we really appreciate how smoothly you've arranged all this. This house is an absolute gem." Her husband pulled a fountain pen from his jacket pocket and stepped toward the table. There it was. The deposit contract sat in plain sight, and beside it was a crisp new copy of the Financial Power of Attorney Richard had reprinted that very morning. He truly believed everything was settled. He believed the only thing standing in his way had been a frightened, sick, 62-year-old woman lying upstairs in bed. Derek folded his hands together and added his own polished little lie to the performance. "This house has given our family so many beautiful memories," he said, "but now it's time for the younger generation to have the capital to build the future. My tech startup is at a critical stage of fundraising. My mother is actually very happy to see the house passed on to a successful young couple like you. This decision is a meaningful sacrifice she's making for her children and grandchildren." Chloe, of course, couldn't resist adding her own layer of poison. She raised her phone a little higher, recording what she clearly believed was the glorious climax of their victory. "Exactly," she said with a bright smile. "Everyone is completely happy with this decision. Sometimes you have to let go of the past in order to embrace the future. We've already found a beautiful luxury care facility for Mom, full-time nursing staff day and night. It's really the perfect ending for everyone." I stood motionless at the top of the stairs, listening to every shameless lie. They were dissecting my life, selling my house, using my very existence as a prop to win sympathy from strangers. They were drunk on the fantasy of victory. They believed they were the smartest people in the room. They believed my final line of defense had collapsed the moment I spilled that grape juice 2 days earlier. They were dividing up the spoils without realizing the blade was already at their throats. I took one long, steady breath. Cool air filled my lungs. I was not wearing pajamas. I was not wrapped in one of those shapeless wool cardigans Richard liked to pressure me into wearing so I would look older, weaker, easier to dismiss. I was dressed in the finest clothes I owned, the same kind of outfit I used to wear when I appeared in federal court. A soft silk blouse, tailored black trousers, my hair swept up neatly, and in my hands I was not carrying another glass of juice for them to laugh at. I was carrying 3 thick, flawless files with the power to destroy every single one of them. The first file was the trust documentation. The second was the bank trail for the shell company. The third was the federal IRS whistleblower complaint. Then I stepped onto the first stair. The sharp click of my heels against the oak cut cleanly through Valerie's laughter. Richard frowned and turned toward the staircase. Derek and Chloe both looked up. The young husband from New York froze his fountain pen, hovering only millimeters above the deposit contract, and in an instant the entire room fell silent. I descended one step at a time, slowly, calmly, with the composure and authority of the true owner of that house. The vulture's celebration was over, and now the hunter had finally stepped into the light. I stepped onto the final stair and walked straight into the center of the living room. There was no screaming, no panicked tears, none of the collapse they had all been waiting for. I simply stood there in my silk blouse and tailored black trousers, letting my eyes drift across the stunned faces frozen in front of me. The young husband from New York jerked his hand back so fast he dropped his fountain pen onto the glass coffee table. The sharp clatter cracked through the suffocating silence. Richard was the first to find his voice. His face had gone red with rage, but even now in front of potential buyers, he still tried to wear the mask of the patient, long-suffering husband. "Barbara, what are you doing down here?" he asked, his voice low, smooth, and threaded with a quiet threat. "You're exhausted. You need to rest. Valerie, take her back upstairs." Valerie moved immediately, that fake realtor smile snapping right back into place. "Oh, Barbara, you really shouldn't be wandering around like this," she said sweetly, reaching out as if she had the right to touch me. "Let me help you upstairs. We're just finishing a few final details for the house. Everything is going beautifully." I didn't step back. I didn't slap her hand away. I simply lowered my eyes to the hand she had stretched toward me and looked at it with such pure contempt that Valerie quietly pulled it back on her own. Then I lifted the old parchment-colored file in my hand and dropped it onto the glass table. It landed directly on top of the fake power of attorney and the deposit contract with a hard, dry thud that echoed across the room. "There's one very large hole in your paperwork, Valerie," I said. My voice was calm, clear, each word sharp enough to cut. "And that hole is this: you're trying to sell a property that does not belong to the man who hired you." Richard let out a short, brittle laugh and turned toward the young couple. "I'm sorry," he said smoothly, forcing an embarrassed smile. "My wife has been increasingly confused lately. The dementia has started affecting her grasp of reality. This home is marital property, and I have full legal authority to handle the transaction." "You have no authority at all, Richard." I cut in instantly, not giving him even 1 second to regain control of the room. "And I do not have dementia." Then I turned and looked directly at the young husband, who was now standing rigid beside the coffee table. "I'm sorry your evening has been ruined," I said evenly. "But if you sign that document, you will be making yourselves participants in a real estate fraud scheme. This house was never marital property. It has been held inside an irrevocable trust created by my father more than 20 years ago. I am the sole beneficiary. Richard's name has never been on the deed, and he does not have the legal right to sell a single brick of this house." Valerie went white. The perfect layers of makeup on her face could no longer hide the panic rising underneath. She snatched the file off the table and began flipping through the pages with trembling fingers. "That's impossible," she muttered, her eyes racing across the legal language and the notarized seals from the state. Then she looked up at Richard, stunned. "Richard, you told me you had full authority. You showed me the deed. You were shown an outdated copy from before the trust was established," I said coldly. "As a licensed real estate agent, you were supposed to verify the chain of title through the county records yourself, not take the word of a dentist. But you were too blinded by the size of your commission and by your personal malice to do the most basic due diligence." The young couple understood instantly. The husband snatched up his pen, shoved it into his jacket pocket, and grabbed his wife's hand. "We want no part of this family's legal mess," he said to Richard, his voice sharp with anger. "This deal is over." Then they turned and walked quickly toward the door without looking back once. The front door slammed shut behind them, taking every last bit of Valerie's commission and Richard's fantasy with it. Valerie stood frozen in place, the trust documents trembling in her hands. I could practically watch it happen in real time, her career, her reputation, her future, all collapsing in front of her eyes. "You lied to me," she hissed, turning on Richard with open fury. Were you trying to drag me into a federal fraud case? Richard didn't answer. He was too busy staring at me, jaw locked tight, every muscle in his face straining under the weight of total exposure. "Don't rush to blame Richard, Valerie," I said, pulling her attention back to me. "You are not innocent here." I took one step forward. "You knew Richard had frozen my accounts. You knew he was using a fraudulent medical evaluation to pressure me. You called me on Saturday morning and threatened to use your brokerage's attorneys to force me out of my own home. Every one of those actions points to coercion, fraud, and professional misconduct." Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "Your call from Saturday was fully recorded," I said. "Connecticut is a one-party consent state. Tomorrow morning I will be sending that recording along with the forged paperwork in this room to the State Real Estate Commission. They tend to take a very dim view of agents who use their license to help strip elderly women of their property." I let the silence settle before I delivered the rest. "You're not just losing this commission, Valerie. You are going to lose your real estate license permanently. The career I paid for 10 years ago." I tilted my head and gave her a cold, measured smile. "I'm officially taking it back." Valerie's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. Her knees seemed to soften beneath her, and she had to brace herself against the back of the sofa to keep from collapsing. The arrogance that had fueled her all week had been crushed into something else, now pure terror. She had finally realized the truth. She had chosen the wrong enemy. She thought she was hunting weak prey. Instead, she had wandered straight into the den of a predator. I looked directly into her bloodless face. Every cruel remark she had thrown at me, every sneer, every condescending little smile, had now swung back around and landed on her with full force. She had called me outdated, weak, a housewife who knew nothing about the modern world of business. And now that same outdated woman was holding her entire professional future in the palm of her hand. "You can't do this, Barbara." Valerie stammered, her voice now thin and desperate. "If you send that recording in, my brokerage will fire me immediately. I'll face massive fines. I could even be criminally charged. I'll lose everything." "That," I said, my eyes never leaving hers, "is exactly what you intended to do to me." My voice held no pity, not one drop. "You were prepared to throw me out of my home with no money, no dignity, and no protection, just so you could collect 3% on a sale that was never legal to begin with. You chose greed over family. Now you can face the consequences of that choice." Then I pointed toward the front door. "Pick up your things and get out of my house, Valerie, right now, before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." And just like that, she broke. Real tears spilled down her face now. Not the polished tears of manipulation, not the practiced emotion of a woman performing sympathy. These were tears born from fear, from regret, from the sudden realization that her life was about to shatter. She didn't look at Richard again. Not once. She lowered her head, slipped past me, and ran for the front door, leaving behind her expensive leather bag and her neatly printed pricing sheets scattered across my floor. The first strike had landed perfectly. Their wall had cracked wide open, and now only 3 of them remained in the room. Valerie's footsteps had barely faded beyond the front door before a suffocating silence swallowed the room whole. I turned slowly and looked at my only son. Derek sat frozen on the sofa, his face pale beads of sweat gathering along his hairline. For one brief second, he looked exactly the way he had looked at 10 years old when he shattered my father's antique vase and tried to hide the pieces behind the curtains. But Derek was not 10 anymore. He was 34 years old, a grown man who had been fully prepared to shove his own mother into a nursing home so he could finance a luxury electric car. "Mom," Derek stammered, scrambling to pull that old fake confidence back over himself like a cheap jacket. "I didn't know anything about the trust, I swear. Aunt Valerie and Dad handled all of that. I just thought selling the house would help the family. My startup really does need the capital, Mom. We can still work something out, can't we?" I looked at him with the coldest expression a mother can ever give her child. "A startup. Derek," I said, my voice slow and level. "You mean Chloe's $35,000 credit card debt, and the Tesla Model X you two were planning to buy so you could impress imaginary investors." Chloe gasped so hard her phone nearly slipped from her hand. Her eyes flew wide with panic. "How do you know that?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "I didn't even turn toward her." My eyes stayed locked on Derek. "I know," I said quietly, because I was standing right outside the kitchen door on Thanksgiving night while the two of you whispered about draining the proceeds from the sale of my house. "I know because I heard you say in your own words that I was a financially clueless old woman who only knew how to bake pies and tend a garden. You thought I would sign whatever was put in front of me so the two of you could use my money to clean up your debt." Derek swallowed hard. His throat bobbed. He dragged a hand through his hair, desperately searching for some excuse, some explanation, some lie that might still save him. I didn't give him the chance. "The most painful part of this isn't your stupidity, Derek," I said. "It's your cruelty." My voice never rose. That made it worse. "When your father slid that fake medical evaluation across the table and claimed I was mentally declining, you joined him. You used the bond between mother and son as a weapon. You tried to manipulate me with it. But you forgot something very basic when you chose to go to war with a forensic accountant. I lifted the trust file and turned one deliberate page. Never come after their assets unless you've actually read the contract. Then I pointed to a specific paragraph in the document. When your grandfather created this irrevocable trust, he understood something about human nature that you clearly do not, I said. He included what is known as a no-contest asset protection clause. It states in very plain language that any legal heir who conspires to manipulate, coerce, or pressure the primary beneficiary, meaning me, into selling or surrendering trust property, will be permanently removed from the line of inheritance. Derek shot up from the sofa as if electricity had torn through him. "That's impossible," he shouted. "I'm your son, your only son. You can't cut me out of the inheritance over some ridiculous clause." "It isn't ridiculous," I said, my tone turning sharp as glass. "And yes, I absolutely can." I took one step closer. "Your participation in this scheme, combined with the evidence your wife so thoughtfully recorded on that phone, is more than enough to trigger the clause. This trust worth over $2 million will never belong to you." I let the words hang there for a beat before delivering the final blow. "When I die, every dollar of it will go directly to charity. Not to you, not to your wife, not to your fantasy life. You will not receive 1 cent. Chloe broke first. A raw, ugly sob tore out of her throat. This time there was no camera performance, no polished tears, no manipulative, trembling voice. This was real panic, the sound of a gold digger realizing the mine had just collapsed right in front of her. The dream of designer cars, elegant parties, and effortless luxury shattered all at once. She spun toward Derek and started pounding her fists against his chest, screaming at him for lying to her, for promising her wealth that no longer existed, for dragging her into a disaster that had just erased their future in one stroke. And I stood there silent and still as a stone wall, watching them turn on each other. The son I had once sacrificed my youth to raise was now nothing more than a hollow stranger with empty hands. The second strike had landed perfectly. It had severed the root of his entitlement completely. And now, only one target remained. Slowly I turned my head and fixed my eyes on Richard. Valerie was gone. Derek and Chloe were sinking into open panic. And in that vast living room, all that remained was a deadly, suffocating silence. Slowly I turned, my eyes locked onto Richard. He was still standing beside the fireplace, one hand clenched tightly around his glass of red wine. The polished face of a respected dentist had twisted into something uglier now, something raw with anger. But deep in his eyes I could still see it, arrogance. He still believed he was holding the winning hand. He still thought the trust only protected the house, while the money remained his. Richard slammed the wineglass down onto the mantel. The sharp crack of glass against stone sliced through the room. He drew in one long breath, trying to rebuild that illusion of authority. "Fine, Barbara!" He thundered, his voice echoing through the room and forcing everyone else into silence. "Keep this crumbling house if it means that much to you. Do you really think I need it? I'm one of the top dentists in this state. I have a practice worth millions and more secure savings than you could ever imagine. I'll file for divorce first thing tomorrow morning. And with Dr. Evans's medical evaluation, I'll make sure you don't get a single cent from our marital assets. You can grow old alone inside that pathetic trust while I go on living a brilliant life." I smiled. A calm, icy smile so cold it seemed to lower the temperature in the room itself. Then I took one slow step toward the glass table and lifted the second file, the pale brown one, the one that held the filthiest secret of his entire life. "You have always underestimated me, Richard," I said, my voice flat and still smooth as the frozen surface of a winter lake. "You thought that because I spent the last 20 years baking pies, arranging flowers, and holding this family together, my mind had somehow stopped working. You forgot that before I ever carried your last name, I was a forensic accountant. My job was hunting arrogant men who believed they were smarter than the law and more clever than their wives." Then I dropped the file onto the table. Bank statements and tax records spilled out across the glass, exposed under the chandelier light for everyone to see. "Let's talk about your $1 million practice," I said. "For the past 4 years, you've been reporting declining profits. You told me rising supply costs and employee insurance were eating into the clinic's margins. But when I reconciled the records, I found the real story. You created a Delaware shell company called ES Consulting. Then you funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars out of the dental practice and disguised those transfers as consulting and marketing expenses for the purpose of large-scale tax evasion." Richard froze. The blood drained from his face so fast it was almost theatrical. The divorce threat he had thrown at me only seconds earlier evaporated into thin air. On the sofa, Derek and Chloe stared in stunned silence. They hadn't known. They had truly believed their great patriarch was trying to rescue Derek's startup. And ES. Consulting never performed a single day of legitimate marketing work. I continued, my voice turning sharper now, each word driving like a nail into the coffin of his lies. That company guaranteed the lease on a luxury apartment in downtown Boston, an apartment rented for your 28-year-old mistress, Elena Santos. She is younger than our own daughter-in-law. You stole from your family, lied to your wife, lied to your son, and used marital assets to support a woman young enough to be your child. And then you planned to use the proceeds from the sale of my home as a retirement fund for your new life with her. You bastard, Chloe hissed, staring at her father-in-law with naked disgust. Beside her, Derek collapsed forward, his face buried in his hands, unable to process what he had just heard. The perfect father image Richard had spent years constructing had just shattered in front of his son. Richard stumbled one step toward the table. His hands were shaking violently now. "Give me those papers, Barbara," he snarled, lunging forward. "You had no right to go through my business records. Those are private, personal property. Even if you know there's nothing you can do. Every account is in my name. I'll call the bank tonight, drain everything, and disappear. You won't touch a single dollar." He reached for the file. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just stood there, my eyes locked onto his, and let my stillness crush his panic. "You won't be withdrawing a single cent, Richard," I said, and now my voice carried the force of a sentence already passed. "Did you really think I printed these records just to scare you in the living room when you are dealing with a financial criminal rule? Number 1 is simple. You stop the flow of money before they have the chance to run." Then I picked up the third file, the final file, and placed it on top of the others. Stamped clearly across the cover was the seal of the Internal Revenue Service. "I spent the entire weekend preparing a 100-page report," I said slowly, clearly every syllable landing like a judge's gavel. "It includes the transfer records, the false invoices, the lease agreement, and every piece of supporting evidence tied to your scheme. This morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, I submitted the full package to the Federal Whistleblower Division. As a lawful whistleblower, I am protected from retaliation, and I am entitled to 30% of whatever the government recovers from your tax fraud. Your divorce threat means nothing when the assets themselves are under federal seizure." Richard's knees began to shake. His breathing turned ragged, shallow, desperate. He looked less like a powerful doctor now and more like a drowning man thrashing in dark water. "The federal government does not move as slowly as divorce court," Richard I said, delivering the final blow with absolute calm. "When they see clear evidence of tax evasion and money laundering, they act immediately. At 9:30 this morning, an emergency asset freeze was issued. Your personal accounts, your retirement savings, and even the operating accounts of your dental practice have all been frozen by federal order. Your credit cards are nothing but useless pieces of plastic now." "No!" Richard screamed. It was not the voice of a powerful man. It was the howl of someone falling from the peak of his illusion all the way to the bottom. He fumbled frantically in his pocket, yanked out his expensive phone, and dialed the bank with trembling fingers. He hit speaker. His hand shook so badly he nearly dropped the device before the call even connected. Then the automated voice filled the living room, calm and merciless, cutting straight through the last scraps of his hope. "We're sorry. Your account is currently suspended pursuant to action by the appropriate authorities. Please contact your nearest branch for further assistance." The phone slipped from Richard's hand and crashed onto the oak floor. He staggered backward until his shoulder slammed into the wall beside the fireplace. Every ounce of strength seemed to drain out of him at once. The arrogance, the cruelty, the smug certainty, all of it had been crushed under the full weight of law and truth. He had tried to throw me out of my own home penniless. He had tried to use a fake diagnosis to strip me of my rights. He had tried to erase me. But in the end, he was the one who lost everything. My fortress still stood, and the empire of lies he had spent years building had just burned to ash. The silence in the living room had barely settled after the bank's automated message ended when the front door burst open again. The hinges slammed so hard against the oak-paneled wall that the framed pictures lining the hallway trembled. Valerie stormed back inside. She hadn't really left after all. She had been standing out on the porch in the freezing night air, frozen in place, listening to every word. The frozen accounts, the IRS report the full scope of Richard's collapse. Her flawless makeup had dissolved into streaks of tears and rage. Her expensive emerald blazer was wrinkled, twisted, and hanging off her shoulders. She no longer looked like the polished, arrogant real estate executive who had walked into my house certain she owned the room. Now she looked like something far more dangerous, a wounded animal with nothing left to lose. And this time, I was not her target. Richard was. She flew at him with terrifying speed. Before he could even lift a hand to defend himself, she swung her designer leather handbag straight into his face. The metal hardware on the strap cracked against his cheekbone with a sharp, vicious sound. Richard staggered backward, clutching his face. Valerie didn't stop. She lunged at him, clawing wildly, her manicured nails sinking into the front of his silk shirt and ripping expensive buttons clean off. "This is all your fault," she screamed. Her voice was ragged now, raw and broken beneath the weight of pure fury. "You told me everything was legal. You handed me that fake deed. You told me this woman was losing her mind and that you had full control over this house. You used me as a shield for your filthy little asset-dumping scheme so you could fund that cheap young mistress." Richard tried to shove her away, but desperation had given Valerie a frightening kind of strength. She clung to his collar, shaking him so violently he could barely keep his footing. "Do you have any idea what you've done to my life?" she shrieked, tears pouring down her distorted face. "I worked 10 years for my position at that brokerage. 10 years. I bled for that reputation. I brought in wealthy clients from New York. I threw away my dignity to help you threaten the very sister-in-law who paid for my education. And now, because of your idiotic paperwork, because of your disgusting arrogance, I'm going to lose my license forever. I'll be dragged into court as an accomplice in federal fraud. The IRS won't spare anyone tied to that shell company. You ruined me, Richard. You destroyed my career." Richard finally shoved her hard enough to send her stumbling backward onto the velvet sofa beside Derek. "Have you lost your mind?" he shouted. His voice trembled now, stripped of authority, yet still clinging to the last shreds of it. "I had no idea she was secretly gathering documents and reporting everything to the government. I've lost everything too. Do you think I wanted this? We're both victims of that vicious woman." He pointed at me, but Valerie shot back up and slapped him across the face with such force that the sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. "Don't you dare play the victim with me," she screamed. "The only victims here are the people you lied to and manipulated for years. You are the most cowardly, idiotic man I have ever known. Did you really think you could outsmart the federal government? Did you really think you could use me to unload this house, grab the cash, and run off to Boston with that little girl without consequences? You are worth nothing. You are a disgrace to this entire family." Derek had curled in on himself in the armchair, both hands locked over his head, too terrified to intervene. He just muttered broken, meaningless words under his breath, panicking as the financial rescue he had counted on disintegrated right in front of him. Chloe had backed herself into the far corner of the room, staring in horror as the older generation she had tried to manipulate tore itself apart in front of her. The cruel alliance they had built so carefully to strip me of everything was now shattered beyond repair. There was no family left, no loyalty, no respect, only greedy people tearing each other apart the moment their shared profit disappeared. Valerie finally stepped back, chest rising and falling in ragged gasps. She looked at Richard with absolute disgust. Then slowly she turned toward me. There was no apology left in her now. No plea for mercy. She knew better. She understood that with me the verdict had already been sealed, and there would be no leniency. She bent down, picked up her handbag from the floor, and turned toward the door, walking with unsteady steps, stripped of every trace of the confidence she had once worn like armor. Just before she reached the threshold, she stopped. Then she turned back and looked at Richard one last time. "My lawyer will contact you first thing tomorrow morning," she said. Her voice had gone cold, flat, deadly. "I'm telling the state investigators everything. Every text message, every phone call, every instruction you ever gave me. If I'm going down into this mud, I swear to God I will drag you all the way to the bottom with me." Then the oak door slammed shut once again. This time, she was truly gone, gone forever. And with her went the last remains of the glittering career she had spent a decade building. Richard stood there, one hand pressed to his bleeding cheek, his breathing heavy and uneven. He looked at me with the terror of a man who had just realized there was no escape left anywhere in this world. And I simply stood there, calm, still, smiling faintly as I watched the ashes of the empire of lies he had once been so proud of drift silently to the floor. The front door had barely slammed shut behind Valerie when a chilling silence settled over the living room. I turned my gaze toward the velvet sofa where Derek and Chloe were still sitting. The mask of the sweet, obedient daughter-in-law had completely fallen from Chloe's face, now shattered into pieces on the floor, along with the rest of their illusion. There were no more crocodile tears, no more trembling pleas for me to sacrifice myself for the future of the family. Her eyes were wide now, cold, hollow, calculating. She looked from her father-in-law, still pressed against the wall and gasping for breath, to the son who had just been erased from a $2 million trust. And in that instant, she understood the truth. The well had run dry, and she was stranded beside a man with nothing. Chloe shot up from the sofa without warning. She didn't even glance at Derek. Her perfectly manicured hand snatched up the designer handbag sitting on the table, every movement sharp and merciless. There was no hesitation in her, no trace of a devoted wife preparing to stand beside her husband through hardship. She pulled out her phone, and her fingers moved across the screen with terrifying speed. "What are you doing, Chloe?" Derek asked, lifting his head toward her, his voice trembling with panic. For the first time, the full terror of a man who had spent his life leaning on other people's money was written plainly across his face. "Who are you calling? We need to talk. We can fix this. We can figure something out. I still have the startup." Chloe stopped typing. Then she turned her head slowly and looked at him with a kind of disgust so raw it almost made the room feel colder. It was the kind of look that slices through every last illusion and goes straight for the fragile ego underneath. "A solution!" Derek. Chloe spat, her voice shrill and vicious as it echoed through the room. "Are you insane? Your startup is nothing but a mountain of debt and lies. The developers quit last month. My credit cards are being declined everywhere. The only reason I married you and tolerated this self-righteous circus of a family was because of that $2 million inheritance. And now your mother has cut you out of it completely. Your father's assets are frozen by the federal government. You don't have a single dollar to your name. You are a complete failure." "But I love you," Derek cried, his voice breaking as weak tears spilled down his face. "You promised you'd stay with me when things got hard. We're married, Chloe. Love doesn't pay off $35,000 in credit card debt, Derek," Chloe said with a bitter laugh, no longer making any attempt to hide what she truly was. "I do not spend hours every day in the gym and the spa just to end up married to a broke man." I already called a car service. It'll be here in 5 minutes. I'm clearing my things out of the apartment tonight. My lawyer will send you divorce papers next week. She took one step closer, eyes glittering with contempt. And don't ever call me again. Then she turned on her heel and walked straight toward the hallway. She didn't look at me, not even once. She knew better. To me, she was no longer even worth considering a threat. She was just a parasite in search of a new host. The sharp rhythm of her high heels struck the hardwood floor with cold, deliberate finality. Then the front door opened and slammed shut once more, taking with it every last illusion Derek had ever clung to about glamorous love and effortless success. And just like that, he collapsed, completely. He slid off the sofa and dropped to his knees on the floor, both hands covering his face as he sobbed like an abandoned child. No one moved to comfort him. No one rushed to his side. Richard was still frozen near the wall, trapped inside the horror of his own downfall. And I remained exactly where I was, still composed, unshaken, watching my ungrateful son pay the price of his greed. Their wicked alliance had officially disintegrated. The gold digger had fled. The empire of lies I had crushed with my own hands now lay in ruins all around them. And for the first time all evening, they finally understood that none of them had ever been in control. The door slammed shut behind Chloe, taking the last trace of life out of the room with it. Now, only the three of us remained. Derek was still crumpled on the floor, face buried in his hands, sobbing. And Richard, the man who had once prided himself on total control, now looked like nothing more than an empty shell. He slowly slid down the wall beside the fireplace until both knees hit the polished oak floor. The respected dentist, the polished upper-class man in tailored suits, now kneeling at my feet. "Barbara, please." Richard choked out, his voice hoarse and broken. Tears began spilling from the corners of his aging eyes. "It's not what you think. Elena set me up. She manipulated me. She got inside my head. I never wanted to leave you. I was under so much pressure from work and I made a mistake. Please, withdraw the report from the IRS. We can start over. I'll end everything with her. We can travel through Europe like you always wanted. Please don't destroy me." I stared at the bowed head of the man I had called my husband for 35 years. If this had been Barbara 10 years ago, maybe I would have collapsed beside him and cried. Maybe I would have believed those cheap, desperate lies. But the Barbara standing there now felt only one thing discussed. I did not step back. I did not kneel to meet him at eye level. I stood tall, straight-backed, unmoving, like a tower he could never shake. "You were not manipulated, Richard," I said. My voice was so flat, so cold that it made him shudder. "You personally signed the lease on that apartment through your shell company. You personally transferred every dollar of our hard-earned money to that woman. You personally called Dr. Evans and arranged a fraudulent diagnosis to have me locked away in a nursing home. There was no mistake here. There was no moment of weakness. This was a calculated, deliberate plan. And the only reason you are on your knees right now is not because you are sorry. You are on your knees because you got caught, and because you no longer have any money to run." Richard looked up at me, his face twisted with pure desperation. "You can't do this to me," he whispered. "This is our home. This is my home, Richard." I cut in each word sharp enough to sever the last thread between us. "And you are no longer welcome in it." I let the silence land before I gave him the rest. I called my attorney just before I came downstairs tonight. The restraining petition and separation filing have already been submitted on grounds of financial abuse and conspiracy to strip me of my civil autonomy. You have exactly 24 hours to pack your clothes and get off my property. Anything purchased with marital funds or trust money stays here. If I see you or Derek within 1 mile of this house after Wednesday morning, I will ask the county sheriff to put both of you in handcuffs for unlawful trespass." I did not wait for him to answer. I turned and walked toward the staircase with calm, measured steps. No screaming, no final argument, no dramatic scene. My silence was the cruelest punishment of all. I left the man who betrayed me kneeling in the ashes of his own ruin, and walked upstairs to the bedroom to enjoy the most peaceful sleep I had had in 35 years. 6 months have passed since that fateful night, and now I'm sitting on the top deck of a luxury yacht gliding across the sun-drenched waters of the Mediterranean. The sea breeze is warm and salted, brushing gently through my hair. I lean back against a plush chaise lounge, a chilled cocktail resting in my hand, and watch as the sun slowly sinks behind the breathtaking cliffs of Italy's Amalfi Coast, setting the sky on fire with streaks of crimson gold and rose. Around me, soft jazz drifts through the evening air, weaving together with the easy laughter of new friends. There is no suffocating tension here, no fake dinner parties, no judgmental stares, no poisonous little remarks disguised as family concern. Only peace. Absolute peace. I take a slow sip of my cocktail and let the cool sweetness settle across my tongue. The truth is, my real life didn't begin until I was 62. The phone resting on the glass table beside me vibrates softly. A new email notification. It's from my private wealth management firm. I unlock the screen, and there it is, my account balance. A string of numbers so long it would make most people stop breathing for a second. It was my lawful 30% whistleblower award from the Internal Revenue Service. When you hand the federal government undeniable evidence of a sophisticated tax evasion and money laundering operation tied to a high-revenue dental practice, the reward is substantial. Very substantial. That money belongs to me now, legally, cleanly, irrevocably, and no one on this earth can touch it. My beautiful lake house in Connecticut is still standing exactly where it always stood, quiet, elegant, untouchable. It remains fully protected inside the trust. I hired a professional property management team to care for the grounds, trim the hydrangeas, and maintain every inch of the house while I travel the world. Every so often they send me fresh photographs of the garden in full bloom. I no longer wake up early to press expensive shirts for a man who betrayed me. I no longer tolerate the entitlement of ungrateful children who treated my assets like their personal emergency fund. And I no longer listen to anyone tell me I'm too old, too fragile, or too confused to control my own life. Tonight, I'm wearing a soft emerald silk dress that drapes perfectly against my skin, a color chosen not for anyone else's approval, but because it reflects exactly who I have become: confident, powerful, unapologetically alive. I no longer hide myself inside dark, muted clothes Richard once preferred because they made me look smaller, quieter, easier to dismiss. Not anymore. Now I am radiant, independent, and in complete command of my own future, because the most perfect revenge a woman can ever take is not screaming, it is not begging, it is not breaking things in a storm of grief. The most perfect revenge is using law, intelligence, and patience to protect yourself, and then building a life so dazzling, so peaceful, and so utterly beyond the reach of your enemies that the people who once tried to destroy you are left choking on the ashes of their own greed. I set my cocktail down on the glass table stretched beneath the fading Italian sky and smile at the endless horizon ahead of me. The sun may be setting over the Mediterranean, but inside me the brightest sunrise of my life has only just begun. Financial freedom and self-respect are the most powerful weapons a woman will ever possess. My name is Barbara. I am 62 years old, and I took back my kingdom with my own two hands. Sometimes I still allow myself a few quiet minutes to think about the people who sat around that Thanksgiving table. Not because I miss them, but because life has a way of delivering consequences with a precision that feels almost divine. The vast fortune they once schemed to steal from me has now become the most distant mirage of all, something they will spend the rest of their lives knowing they can never touch. Last week, Marcus called to update me on the legal fallout. Richard, my polished, arrogant husband, now faces 3 very serious federal charges: tax evasion, financial fraud, and money laundering. His prestigious dental practice has been completely shut down by the government pending investigation. Every bank account, retirement fund, and even his luxury car has been seized. And the young mistress in Boston. The moment she realized the accounts supporting her lifestyle had been frozen, she packed up everything she owned and disappeared without a single goodbye. Richard is now living alone in a cramped little rental room in a decaying suburb, waiting for trial and facing the very real possibility of spending at least 10 years in prison. He destroyed his own reputation, his own career, his own freedom. And he did it with his own hands. Valerie, the sister-in-law, who once strutted around in designer suits and spoke to me with such polished contempt, isn't doing much better. After I submitted the recorded phone call and the supporting evidence to the State Real Estate Commission, her license was permanently revoked. Her brokerage fired her immediately to protect its own name. Locked out of the luxury market and drowning under massive fines, Valerie was eventually forced to file for bankruptcy. A few days ago, an old friend told me they saw her working the register at a discount grocery store. The woman who once bragged about closing million-dollar deals is now scanning cheap cereal boxes for minimum wage, trying to survive one shift at a time. And then there's Derek, the son I once loved more than I loved myself. After he was cut out of the trust and immediately abandoned by his opportunistic wife Chloe, his fantasy tech startup finally collapsed for good. The mountain of credit card debt and high-interest personal loans crushed whatever remained of his dream of becoming a millionaire. No more luxury car, no more five-star dinners, no more pretending to be a brilliant young founder on the edge of success. Now he works the night shift as a waiter in a modest city diner. Every evening he clears dirty tables, carries heavy plates, and forces himself to smile for strangers in exchange for tips, all while trying to chip away at a debt so large he may never truly outrun it. And the strangest part of all is this: I do not feel triumphant, but I do not feel sorry for them either. They are not my victims. They are the victims of their own greed, their own cruelty, their own endless hunger for things they did not earn. The iron wall I built around myself did not go looking for anyone to destroy. It simply reflected back with perfect accuracy everything filthy they threw at me. People often say that once a woman passes 50, she should step quietly into the background. They expect us to become invisible, obedient, to spend whatever years we have left sacrificing ourselves for the endless demands of family. They assume our minds have dulled with age and that our endurance has no limit. But they are completely wrong. Later life is not when women are weakest. It is when we are sharpest. By then we have spent decades watching, learning, surviving, and building. We understand how this world works. Our silence is not surrender. Our silence is evidence gathering. Never set yourself on fire to keep warm the people who do not value your flame. If someone uses the word family as a weapon to strip away your dignity and the assets you worked your whole life to build, then use clarity law and self-respect to teach them a lesson they will never forget. It is never too late to take back control of your life. You do not owe anyone unreasonable sacrifice. Your money is yours. Your home is yours. And your life, whether you are 60, 70, or beyond, is still entirely yours. If you are watching this video and you are also a woman who has been underestimated, used, or backed into a corner by the very people who should have loved you most, I want you to know something: you are not alone. There is a power inside you that people like that will never truly understand. So tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have signed that power of attorney? Or would you have flipped the board with your own two hands? Leave a comment below and share your story. I promise I read every single one because I know that every woman carries a silent battle inside her, and every one of those battles deserves to be heard. If this story gave you strength, press like and subscribe. Not for me. Do it so stories like this can reach the women who truly need to hear them. And check the description below because I've left another story there about a woman rising from betrayal, and I have a feeling you're going to love that one too. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay strong and never let go of the key to your own life.